Jason Matthews sat silently in his office, the light from his desk lamp casting over piles of documents and financial reports. From his vantage point, he could see the bustling scene outside the window, where cars rushed hurriedly through the streets of New York. Everything seemed normal, but deep down Jason felt a sense of unease. Every day he faced hundreds of difficult decisions, thousands of ever-changing numbers. But today, that unease did not stem from a lack of data or work challenges. It came from an unexplainable doubt. Matthews Group, the company he had painstakingly built since his early days after graduation, had now become a powerful retail empire. With thousands of employees and hundreds of stores spread across the country, every small decision could lead to a major change. However, it was these very successes that left Jason feeling uneasy. Everything seemed too perfect. Financial reports showed exceptional growth, employees' work performance was always high, and stores were reporting strong results. But something about those numbers didn't add up, as if there was something being hidden. In recent days, Jason had heard some less than positive stories from a few lower-level employees. Employee satisfaction reports were always at their highest, but Jason couldn't deny that something felt wrong. A few workers kept mentioning the issues they were facing, but none of them dared to say anything clearly. Jason knew that sometimes subordinates were too afraid to speak up for fear of losing their jobs. But was it possible that all these complaints were just random, or was there truly some injustice happening? After days of frustration and worry, Jason decided to do something bold that he had never considered before. He would infiltrate one of his retail stores, posing as a new employee to see if the reports truly reflected the reality. Jason put on a white shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of worn-out sneakers, the simplest clothes he could find. He shortened his hair, discarded his usual suit, and reinvented himself like a man who had just stepped out of the construction site, someone in desperate need of work. Everything from his clothing to his gait was carefully planned so that he wouldn't be recognized. Jason chose the name Mike Johnson, an unemployed man with no family looking for a job. It was the perfect disguise for him to truly understand what was going on under his leadership without arousing suspicion. As he walked into the store, the atmosphere immediately felt different from what he had imagined. Although this was a store performing very well according to reports, the reality made him feel uneasy. Worried eyes, hushed whispers, and the heavy silence in the air made him feel out of place. The employees were working hurriedly, but it seemed as if they were trying to complete their tasks without wanting to communicate or connect with one another. There was something strange. The atmosphere was not like what Jason was used to in his large corporations, where cooperation and openness were core values. Jason tried to blend in. He struck up a conversation with a few employees, not wanting them to think he was different. He kept a friendly demeanor, always smiling, but inside a sense of discomfort continued to grow. He noticed a woman, probably a janitor, working near the aisles. She didn't stop working, even though her shift was almost over, and her eyes were full of exhaustion, as though the weight of the world was on her small shoulders. Her name was Maria Diaz, and she had been working at this store for over 3 years. Though a hard worker and very dedicated, it seemed that Maria was carrying something no one cared about. Jason could sense the exhaustion in her eyes, a pain that could not be hidden. Maria always smiled when she met someone, but Jason could see that behind that smile was an indescribable sadness. Jason decided to approach Maria delicately. After a few casual questions, he realized that not only Maria, but many other employees were affected by something they didn't dare to speak about. One day after the shift had ended, Jason accidentally heard crying from the restroom. He stepped closer and looked through a crack in the door, where he saw Maria's name tag scattered on the floor. An uneasy feeling rose in his chest. He gently knocked on the door and called out, "Maria, are you okay?" The crying gradually stopped, and after a few seconds, Maria stepped out. She quickly wiped away her tears and tried to smile. But it was easy for Jason to see the fatigue and sorrow in every movement of hers. "I'm sorry, I'm not okay. But I'll be fine," Maria said, her voice trembling. Jason noticed her hands were cracked with wounds from constant contact with cleaning chemicals. She looked so small, but the burden on her shoulders was enormous. A 40-year-old janitor working day and night, never taking a day off, working non-stop, just to earn enough money to support her family. "How long have you been working here?" Jason asked, trying to learn more. Maria sighed and looked up at him. 3 years. But recently I've been feeling unwell. Unwell. Are you sick?" Jason asked. Maria was silent for a moment, then finally said, "My daughter Sophia, she needs heart surgery urgently, but I don't have enough money to pay for it, and I don't know what to do." Jason looked into Maria's eyes, feeling the pain she was carrying. He couldn't believe that such a loyal employee like Maria had to face such a serious issue without receiving any support from the company. But what made Jason even angrier was what she shared next. "My hours keep changing constantly. I never know how many hours I'll work next week. Sometimes 15 hours, sometimes 35 hours, but I never have enough money to support my family. And my health insurance has never been effective even though I've worked here for 3 years." Maria's words were like a slap in Jason's face. He couldn't understand why his company would allow loyal, hard-working employees to live in such circumstances. Jason stood still for a moment, reflecting on everything he had heard. A feeling of anger and helplessness surged within him. He had succeeded in building a strong company, but he hadn't realized that under his leadership, an unjust system was taking place. He decided he wouldn't stop here. If what Maria said was true, he had to do something. He couldn't let his company continue to exist with such injustices. Jason returned to work, but deep inside him, a strong determination had sparked. He would have to dig deeper, uncover everything, and if necessary, expose the whole truth. He took a deep breath and prepared himself for the difficult days ahead. Everything would change not just for Maria, but for all those who had been pushed into the shadows in his company. Jason Matthews stood outside the stockroom of the store, hands in his pockets, silently observing. Though he had worked in retail for many years and had witnessed countless challenges faced by employees, he had never felt like this before. A sense of unfamiliarity and unease was rising within him. The employees in this store were not like those he typically saw in reports. They seemed tired, reserved, and barely exchanged words with one another outside of necessary instructions. The fear in the air was palpable. To maintain his cover, Jason continued his role as Mike Johnson, a man seeking temporary work. He had altered his walking style gestures and even his speech to appear as plain and simple as possible. In his white shirt and jeans, he looked like a man just starting out in a difficult life, searching only for a chance to survive. But what troubled Jason wasn't merely the change in attire and mannerisms. What made him uneasy was the realization that something was wrong in his company. This was not the only store he was investigating, but it was one of the top performers according to reports. Yet standing in this space, looking into the eyes of the employees around him, he felt like he had entered a different world, one where joy, creativity, and enthusiasm had been lost. The first thing Jason noticed was the silence that enveloped the store. A heavy silence like an invisible wall separating the employees from one another and from the customers. There was no exchange beyond brief instructions. No laughter, no casual conversation, no friendly greetings. Everything felt mechanical, functioning in silence with no room for emotion. As he entered the store's restroom area, Jason accidentally caught sight of Maria. She was mopping the floor, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the mop. The dim light highlighted the weary look on her face, making her appear much older than her years. The cracks on her hands, the red bruises from cleaning chemicals were clear signs of the long-term strain she had been enduring. Jason decided to approach her again, not out of mere curiosity, but because he felt that Maria was the one who could provide the answers he was searching for. "Maria, are you okay?" Jason asked gently. She looked up at him cautiously, but still managed a faint smile. "Yes, I'm fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "Could you tell me about your work here? I've just started and am trying to understand how things operate." Jason continued, keeping his voice soft and natural. Maria looked at him, then turned her gaze back to the tasks waiting for her. "Well, I've been cleaning here for 3 years. Most of the time I work at night, but recently it feels like I have to work more. The schedule changes all the time, nothing's fixed. Some nights I work the entire shift until morning, but in the end I don't get paid properly." Jason felt a lump in his throat. This was something he had never considered. Although the company always seemed perfect on paper, the reality was very different. Maria continued, her voice filled with worry. "They've cut my hours several times. I can't make any plans for my family. Also, I don't get enough hours to qualify for health insurance. My daughter needs urgent heart surgery, but I can't afford it. The company hasn't helped at all." Jason couldn't comprehend it. As CEO of Matthew's Group, he had reviewed all the reports and figures. His stores always performed excellently. But something was clearly wrong. Those reports weren't the truth. Jason knew that some things were being hidden. Maria's words made it impossible for him to ignore anymore. Jason decided to closely monitor the situation in this store. He began paying attention to every small detail, from the sudden changes in employees' schedules to the strange way shifts were being allocated. Every morning when he arrived at the store, Jason took note of how the other employees behaved. They didn't communicate much with each other. The work areas were always quiet, with only the sounds of footsteps and machines. Everyone seemed like puppets, controlled by an invisible hand. A work environment devoid of encouragement, laughter, or trust in change. He wondered if everyone here felt as hopeless as Maria one day. While reviewing internal reports, Jason discovered something unusual. The work schedules for the employees in this store seemed to have been altered repeatedly without clear reason. Some shifts were cut without prior notice, and those affected were the long-standing employees like Maria. From that point, Jason decided to dive deeper into the shift management system. He found a way to access the store's time-tracking system. What he uncovered was unbelievable. Jason discovered that the store manager Brad Miller was behind all the injustices. He had manipulated the time-tracking system, reducing employees' hours and making unreasonable changes to schedules, ensuring that workers couldn't accumulate enough hours to qualify for health insurance or receive full pay. Whenever someone complained about reduced hours, Brad would come up with unconvincing excuses to resolve the issue. Jason also found emails Brad had sent to other stores instructing them to have employees work extra hours without additional pay, all in the name of his cost-saving policies. This truth made Jason furious. He felt a wave of anger rising within him, but he knew he had to be patient. He couldn't act impulsively without sufficient evidence. Everything needed to be carefully prepared, because if he made a mistake, not only the company, but also his career could be destroyed. Jason couldn't stop thinking about what he had discovered. The more he looked at the reports and interacted with the employees, the more he realized he couldn't keep ignoring the signs. These were not coincidences, they were warnings that his company was heading down the wrong path. Maria, Tommy, Sarah, and thousands of other employees were facing things Jason had never imagined. Even though Matthew's group was financially successful, if he didn't act immediately, everything could collapse at any moment. The beautiful numbers on the reports were just the surface, but behind them were hearts being tortured in silence. Jason looked at the computer screen where data from the stores and employees appeared, and he knew what he had to do. This investigation was not just about protecting the company's reputation. It was about protecting the people he had inadvertently neglected. Step by step, decision by decision, Jason was ready to change everything. In the days that followed, Jason became more aware of the instability in the store. He continued to maintain his cover working as a new employee, but in his heart, he couldn't take his eyes off the strange signs he observed every day. Though still working hard and blending in with the team, an uncomfortable feeling clung to him like a shadow. The unspoken stories, the haunting glances, and the tired gestures of the employees made him unable to stop thinking. Jason began to watch Brad Miller, the area manager of the store. He was always present with an air of self-satisfaction, strolling through the store as if everything were under his control. But every time Jason saw him, something about Brad's treatment of the employees made him uneasy. Brad just issued commands caring only about results without considering the feelings of the people working under him. The disrespect and contempt were evident in every word he spoke. One evening while working the late shift, Jason accidentally overheard a conversation between Brad and another employee. Brad was criticizing the employee for not meeting sales targets. "If you can't hit this target, don't expect to stay," Brad said coldly. He showed no concern for the circumstances of the employees never listening to them. Just fixated on the numbers, as if that was all that mattered. Jason felt anger rising within him. Brad's treatment of employees was not only inhumane but also cruel. The more he realized, the more he knew he had to act quickly to stop these actions, or more people would be pushed into a dire situation. One evening after the shift ended, Jason had a long conversation with Maria. She began recounting what she had endured over 3 years working at the store. The unstable hours, the sudden cuts to her shifts, with no clear reason, and the times Brad had blamed her, even though she had tried her best. She told him that she had never dared to request time off, even when her body was too tired to continue working. This was something she couldn't speak to anyone about. She feared that if she asked for a break, she'd be seen as lazy and fired. Maria also spoke about the other employees, those who worked hard but were always treated unfairly. Some couldn't meet their sales targets because they weren't assigned enough hours. Others had their hours slashed for no reason, just to keep labor costs as low as possible. "Jason, I can't even tell you everything. But I feel like I'm being torn apart. I just want to work with enough hours, have health insurance, and at least be treated like a human," Maria said, her voice breaking, eyes welling with tears. Jason looked into Maria's eyes, and he could no longer pretend not to understand. This wasn't just her problem. This was the story of thousands of employees in his company, people working hard every day, but having their hopes crushed by unjust leadership. Jason realized that he had neglected these issues for far too long, not truly listening to the people who contributed to the company's success. Everything wasn't just about numbers. It was about people. "Maria, I don't know how you've endured all this time, but I promise I will do everything I can to help you and those like you. We'll find a way to change this," Jason said, his voice full of determination. Maria looked at him. Her eyes no longer filled with doubt, but trust. "I hope so," Thank you. Jason nodded, his heart heavy. But this was the moment he had to act. He could no longer stand on the sidelines. The next day, Jason began gathering specific evidence of Brad's misconduct. He secretly accessed the store's time-tracking system and work schedules, recording all the unreasonable changes. He noticed a strange pattern: employees, especially those like Maria, frequently had their hours suddenly cut, with no clear reason preventing them from qualifying for health insurance. Anyone who complained about this was either threatened or given no reasonable explanation. Jason also discovered that Brad had a fake account in the system, which he used to cut costs. But in reality, he was profiting from manipulating employees' hours. The reduced hours were reflected in this account, with the wage cuts being transferred to Brad's personal account, allowing him to pocket money from employees' hours without having to pay them. With this evidence in hand, Jason couldn't stop feeling furious. He had enough reason to expose the truth and confront Brad. However, he knew he had to act carefully. Everything had to be prepared thoroughly, or people like Maria would continue to suffer in silence. Each day, as Jason continued his work undercover, he could feel the injustice in the air more strongly. The other employees, like Maria, each had their own story. From being denied rights to having unrealistic demands placed on them, everything was hidden in the dark, and no one dared to speak up, no one dared to resist. Although the company's reports were always stellar, this was the reality Jason could no longer ignore. The feeling of injustice and pain weighing on each employee was something he couldn't deny. He knew he couldn't continue standing on the sidelines. He couldn't continue ignoring the suffering of the employees. What had happened over the past 3 years under Brad's leadership had to be brought to light, and he had to be the one to do it. Jason had no choice but to rise, face the truth, and figure out how to change everything. He looked at his phone in his hand, thinking about the call he would make tomorrow. Jason Matthews sat in the plain chair of the store's office, silently observing his surroundings. A few employees moved back and forth, their faces tired and anxious. They worked without engaging much with each other, simply completing their tasks mechanically, without enthusiasm or motivation. An oppressive atmosphere hung over the store. Jason wondered if everyone here felt like Maria, or if only a few were enduring this injustice. But in his heart, the answer no longer mattered. Everything he had witnessed was too clear. Brad Miller's management had caused not just one, but thousands of other employees to suffer. Brad Miller, he was a manager in his 30s, overly confident, always asserting his authority over the employees under him. Jason had been observing Brad since his first day at the store. Everything about Brad was different from what Jason had imagined a leader to be. He had no long-term vision, no interest in the development of his staff. Instead, Brad was the epitome of someone hungry for power and profit, willing to drive employees into hardship just to make more money. Jason began observing how Brad ran the store. He showed no concern for the employees' feelings. One afternoon, while Jason was working as Mike Johnson, he overheard Brad shouting from the management area. "Why didn't your shift hit the target? Do you think customers are just going to show up on their own? Have you thought about the numbers?" Brad's voice was harsh, and Jason could feel the rudeness, the lack of respect for his staff. When Brad walked out and saw Maria cleaning the restroom area, he showed no sympathy. "Why is the floor still dirty? If you can't get it done, I'll find someone else to do the job. Do you think the company pays you just to sit and cry?" Brad didn't care at all about Maria's hardships. He only cared about the results. Jason couldn't take it anymore. The coldness and brutality of Brad made him want to intervene, but he knew this wasn't the right moment. He needed to understand everything about Brad, every action he had taken to exploit his employees. Jason realized he needed to gather more solid evidence to confront Brad in a reasonable and effective way. A few days later, Jason decided it was time to begin gathering detailed information about Brad Miller. He knew that if he wanted to confront this man, he needed enough evidence to back him up. Jason started going through Brad's employee records and found something surprising. Brad's file had almost no negative marks. All reports about him were positive. His work performance had always been excellent, and his productivity was always on target. There were no criticisms from his superiors. But as Jason delved deeper into the system's data, he discovered something unexpected. Brad wasn't just sharp in his work. He was very cunning in manipulating the system. He had found ways to cut employees' hours, especially long-term workers like Maria, who still weren't paid fairly. Employees' hours were reduced, they didn't receive wage increases according to their work, and they were never afforded the full benefits they deserved. This wasn't a small issue. These were clear signs that Brad was manipulating and exploiting his power to control the human resources system. Jason was furious. He had seen Brad's clear abuse of power, but he still needed more evidence to tear down these lies. Jason began accessing the store's time tracking and payroll systems to dig deeper. He spent hours combing through the timekeeping reports and noticed an unusual pattern. Employees like Maria were not only having their hours cut, but were also being forced to work with much lower wages than they deserved. Yet the portion of wages cut was being transferred to another account, an account Jason couldn't identify the owner of. It was clear that the only person who could be behind this was Brad. Once again, Jason couldn't believe what he was seeing. The system had been manipulated so skillfully. Employees' working hours were altered, reduced, and the profits from this didn't go into their pockets, but into Brad's. Everything was covered up in fake reports, and there was only one person behind all of this: Brad Miller. A wave of anger surged within Jason. He couldn't let someone like Brad continue sitting comfortably in the power seat. For Jason, this wasn't just about one store. It was about all the stores under Brad's management. If he could do this at one store, there was no reason he couldn't do it at others. With all the evidence in hand, Jason decided to confront Brad Miller directly. However, he knew he couldn't act impulsively. He needed to create a careful plan to expose Brad without ruining everything. This store and all the others needed a change, and Jason couldn't let this manipulation continue. He knew he had to keep investigating, and this time Jason wasn't going to do it alone. He needed help from the other employees, those who had suffered in silence for too long. Jason began speaking with a few employees like Maria, those who had been facing injustice without anyone to turn to. They started to open up, sharing what they had been through, and these stories made Jason even more determined to change everything. "We can't keep going like this," Maria said in a meeting after work. "I know I can't change it on my own, but if you really want to help us, you need to confront Brad." Jason nodded, his heart full of determination. "We won't let this go on. Everything will change and Brad will have no place here." In the following days, Jason continued gathering more evidence and preparing his plan to confront Brad. He couldn't let this abuse continue, but he also couldn't act recklessly. To do this, Jason had to prepare thoroughly, from planning to publicly expose Brad's wrongdoing, to developing a strategy that would protect all employees and ensure fairness. Jason was ready for the battle, but he knew this was only the beginning of a long journey. Jason Matthews couldn't stop. Each evening when the store was empty, he continued working quietly in the management office. The neon lights above seemed to shine directly into his mind, keeping him alert in a world full of lies he was starting to uncover. Each document, each report he examined made his suspicion of Brad Miller clearer. This wasn't ordinary management. This was someone abusing their power, manipulating the system to profit from the employees they were supposed to care for. Jason had started accessing the store's electronic records. From the timekeeping sheets, the work hour reports to the payroll reports, all were carefully stored in the internal system he now had access to. As a temporary employee, Jason quietly continued searching for anomalies. How many times had Maria's hours been cut without reason? How many times had she worked from dawn until late at night, hoping to earn enough to support her daughter? Once again, Maria's face flashed in his mind. She had told him about the family crises she was facing, the worries about the surgery costs for Sophia, her daughter, and the sleepless nights working non-stop, still not having enough hours to qualify for insurance. Each of Maria's stories was a piece of the puzzle that revealed Brad's cruelty. This wasn't just a mistake or a lack of management. This was a deliberate strategy to profit from the pain and desperation of employees. Jason decided to check Maria's timekeeping records for the past 3 months. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Her hours had been cut on important days right before she qualified for insurance. Even when she had completed all her tasks, her hours were still adjusted down, preventing her from receiving the full benefits she was entitled to. Jason couldn't believe what he was seeing. The system Brad Miller had created was a clever, deliberate strategy. He not only adjusted employees' hours, but he also altered the working times on the payroll sheets, all with one goal: maximizing profits for the company while pocketing the employees' share. He checked those accounts and noticed that most of the money cut from employees' pay wasn't returned to the company, but went into an account owned by a subsidiary company that Brad owned. Everything was becoming clearer. Brad had been using the company to profit personally. Jason felt furious, but he knew he couldn't act hastily. He needed to create a solid, thorough plan before confronting Brad. A few days later, as Jason's investigation deepened, he decided to visit the store at night when everyone else had gone home. He had told Rebecca about his plan, and she had prepared the reports so that Jason could confront Brad once he had enough evidence. One evening, after all the employees had left, Jason quietly walked through the aisles, feeling the stillness of the store. He walked toward Brad's office. As he passed the restroom area, he suddenly noticed Maria still working, even though it was late. She was cleaning the sink area, her body exhausted, but she was still diligently finishing her task. Jason stopped for a moment to watch her, then walked over. "Maria," Jason spoke up. She turned around, startled, but then recognized him. "Oh, it's you, Mike. What are you still doing here?" "Thanks for working so hard. But I want to ask you something. Why are you working so late? Don't you need a break?" Maria smiled bitterly. "There's no other choice. They won't give me enough hours to qualify for insurance. If I don't finish the job, I'll get a warning. I can't afford to lose my job, especially with Sophia needing surgery. So even if I'm tired, I have to keep working." Jason felt like a bomb had gone off in his chest. Maria's words made it impossible for him to ignore any longer. He began to understand that not only Maria, but many other employees were facing the same situation. They were working themselves to the bone only to have their rights stripped away, all for the benefit of people like Brad. The next day, Jason called Rebecca and told her what he had just discovered. "We have enough evidence to expose Brad, but I need you to prepare a full report on the internal investigations. I want everything done precisely with no mistakes." Rebecca immediately agreed. "I'll get started, but does Maria know she'll be protected in this case?" Jason nodded. "Of course. Maria won't be affected. Everyone will stand by her. We'll do this right." Jason prepared for the big confrontation with Brad. He had no other choice. Facing this manipulation and abuse of power was essential not only for justice but for the future of all employees in Matthews' group. The next morning, Jason Matthews was no longer the man who made decisions based on numbers or financial plans. He had changed. He was no longer just the CEO of a large company. He was standing in the midst of a battle to protect justice, a battle that could no longer be delayed. Jason sat at his desk, looking at the final documents that Rebecca had sent over the night before. The entire report of the manipulations Brad Miller had carried out over the years was laid out clearly. Every number, every event, every wrong decision of Brad's was now in Jason's hands. There was no more hesitation. He had no choice but to act. What he was doing today wasn't just for Maria, but for all employees like her, those who had suffered in silence for years. Jason picked up the phone and called Rebecca. "Rebecca, I need you to prepare for this confrontation. It's time, we can't delay any longer. Everything will be revealed this morning." "What do you need me to do?" Rebecca asked, her voice determined. "Prepare the reports on Brad Miller's violations. You have all the documents and I'll lead everything. Don't let anyone in the company know about this beforehand. Make sure everything goes smoothly," Jason instructed. Rebecca nodded, even though Jason couldn't see her. He knew she understood. She knew that this battle wasn't simple, and everything they did would be a turning point, not only for Matthews' group, but for the entire retail industry. With all the evidence in hand, Jason was ready to face Brad. Neither of them had ever been in a situation like this, but Jason knew he could no longer avoid the truth. He had prepared thoroughly, and the reports that Rebecca and he had gathered would be their most powerful weapons. Jason walked into Brad's office. The door was closed, and the light from the desk lamp cast a shadowed atmosphere. Brad Miller sat behind his desk, his sharp eyes scanning through the company's final reports, oblivious to Jason's presence. He remained seated with his usual self-satisfied expression. "We need to talk, Brad," Jason said firmly without hesitation. Brad looked up, startled. "Oh, Mr. Matthews, I didn't expect to see you here at this hour." "It's time for us to have a real conversation," Jason replied, "about what's been happening under your management." Brad smiled, trying to remain calm, but Jason could see the tension beginning to show in his eyes. "What do you want to talk about?" "The company's doing great. We're on track for strong growth." "Yes, we're growing strongly, but not because of you, Brad," Jason shot back, not allowing Brad any time to defend himself. "I know everything. What you've done to the employees, especially Maria, and how you've exploited the company for personal gain. The payrolls, the reduced work hours, the wages funneled into your private account. It's all laid bare." Brad tried to maintain his composure, but Jason could hear the tremor in his voice. "You can't do this, Jason. I've helped the company grow. I've saved costs for the company. You can't blame me for a few small issues. It's not a few small issues, Brad. It's fraud, manipulating work hours, and stealing money from the very employees who generate revenue for this company," Jason said. "And I have enough evidence to expose everything." Jason pulled out a thick stack of documents from his bag and placed it on the desk in front of Brad. Each report, each timesheet, each manipulated work schedule was laid out clearly. The bank account Brad used to transfer employees' wages into his own account had also been verified. Every detail was meticulously gathered. There was no room for excuses. Brad looked at the documents, unable to say a word. He knew he couldn't deny it anymore. "You've prepared well," Brad sighed. "But you can't do this to me. I built this store up. Without me, this company wouldn't be where it is today." Jason wasn't swayed. And without employees like Maria, those who worked tirelessly, this company wouldn't have grown. You've exploited them, pushed them to the brink of exhaustion for the sake of a few numbers on reports. I can't accept that. Brad's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. Everything I did was for the company's benefit. We had to keep costs low to achieve maximum efficiency. That's the only way to remain competitive." "No, Brad. That's the way of a coward. Someone who exploits others' suffering for personal gain," Jason replied, his voice as cold as ice. "You've not only violated labor regulations, but also professional ethics. You will answer for what you've done." Brad tried to argue, but no words could justify his actions anymore. He stood up, knocking his chair behind him in anger. "If you do this, you'll destroy everything. This company will collapse without me." Jason stood there, his expression unchanged. "No, Brad. This company will continue to thrive. But not because of your wrongdoings. It will only grow stronger when we truly care for and protect our workers. And you, Brad, will pay for what you've done." Jason didn't give Brad any more chances to argue. He stood up and pointed to the door. "Get out of here, Brad. You're fired immediately. I'll report this to the board of directors and demand a full investigation into your actions. Everything you've done will be exposed to the light." Brad didn't say anything more. He stood still for a moment, his eyes filled with anger and helplessness. Finally, he turned around and walked out of the room without a word. Jason stood there feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: this was the first step in creating real change within the company. As soon as Brad was fired, Jason began planning a complete overhaul of the company. Brad's wrongdoings were not just about one individual. They were part of a larger system that needed to change. The company had to be restructured from within, from labor policies to management practices. Jason was determined not to let this cruelty continue in his company. Rebecca and the HR department began reviewing all employee records, conducting checks and evaluations of benefits and workers' rights. Every employee would be protected, and Jason committed to implementing a new strategy to ensure that everyone was treated fairly. Maria, the catalyst for all these changes, was promoted to a management position at the store. She would become a role model for a fair and humane work environment, where care and respect for people were the top priorities. Jason wasn't just changing the company. He was reinventing himself as a true leader, someone who understood that for long-term success, the most important thing was to elevate human value. Brad Miller had left, but the tension continued to rise. Jason didn't feel relief from seeing him go, not out of regret or sympathy, but because he knew the battle wasn't over. For years, people like Brad Miller didn't just exist in the shadows of a company, but had tight relationships with those at higher levels. Jason knew Brad's misdeeds might only be the tip of the iceberg. As soon as Brad was fired, Jason called for an emergency meeting with the board of directors and senior executives to inform them of the incident. He knew this would be a crucial step, not just to confront his decisions, but to gain support from the upper echelons of the company. Everything had to be handled quickly and seriously, not just for personal honor, but for the future of Matthews Group. The meeting began with a tense atmosphere. The executives sat silently, none daring to speak. Jason stood before them holding a thick file. He could feel the tension in the air, not because of Brad's case, but because of the words that were about to come. "You all know that our company has always upheld ethical values over the years. But today, I'm here not to criticize, but to face the truth." Jason began, his voice firm. "Yesterday, Brad Miller was fired for manipulating work hours, reducing wages, and exploiting the company for personal gain. These actions are unacceptable." One of the executives, Hannah, who always sat beside Jason during important meetings, furrowed her brow, seemingly surprised by his bluntness. "Jason, this is a huge shock. Brad has had impressive accomplishments, and the reports have always shown his effectiveness. We need to be sure about everything before making a final decision. Jason stared directly at Hannah, unwavering. I've reviewed all the reports, Hannah, and I've seen what's undeniable. Those figures were manipulated. Everything was hidden under beautiful numbers. But the employees under Brad, the ones actually working in the stores, have endured oppression, and he's exploited their suffering to create profit for himself. It seemed Jason's words had an impact on some of the board members. They exchanged glances, and finally James, another senior executive, spoke up. Jason, I understand this issue, but we need to clarify a few points. Brad was the one maintaining performance for the stores, and we can't deny he made significant contributions. We can't sustain this false efficiency. Jason responded steadfast. We can't build an empire by exploitation and oppression. We must build on a solid foundation of fairness. I will not accept a system where workers are exploited just so people like Brad can profit. The board began murmuring, discussions erupted. But one thing was clear, Jason's support in the company was growing. The people in the conference room began to feel the shift in the atmosphere, a change they could no longer ignore. After the meeting, Jason decided to continue the deeper investigation. He ordered the HR team to review other stores in the system, where Brad had been in charge, to look for signs of similar manipulative behavior. The investigation wouldn't stop at one store, but would cover the entire Matthews Group system, because Jason believed such actions like Brad's were happening in many other places. A week later, the full report was prepared. Jason, along with Rebecca, sat down to analyze the findings. The numbers in the report didn't lie. The system Brad had applied wasn't an isolated case. It was a systematic strategy aimed at cutting costs and maximizing profits by stripping employees of their rights. Other stores also showed signs of reduced hours, denying workers enough time to qualify for health insurance and other benefits. The report also revealed that many employees had been mistreated, had their wages cut without notice, and some were threatened when they requested improved working conditions. Jason realized that what Brad had done wasn't an isolated act, but part of an unethical management system that had existed too long in Matthews Group. We can't let this continue, Jason said, as he and Rebecca reviewed the report. We need to overhaul the entire company's HR policies. We won't allow our employees to live in fear and injustice. Rebecca looked at Jason, her eyes reflecting deep agreement. Yes, we need a major reform. I'll get started immediately. But we'll need time to do this properly. Jason nodded, feeling ready for this battle. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he had no other choice. He had to face the truth no matter how difficult it was. One morning, as Jason was reviewing reports, Maria walked into his office. She was still in her work uniform, but unlike before, her eyes were bright with confidence. It seemed that the change wasn't just happening in the company, but within Maria herself. Hello, Mike, Maria smiled. But this time it wasn't a worried smile, it was one full of confidence. I want to thank you for everything you've done for us. I never thought I'd have the chance to change this company. Jason looked at Maria, feeling like a bright light had shone into the room. She was no longer the cleaning employee with trembling hands, but a strong woman ready to stand up and fight for her own and her colleagues' rights. This was the change he hoped for throughout the company, a change not just from the leader, but from the diligent, humble workers themselves. Maria, I'm so proud of you, Jason said, smiling. You've done the unimaginable, and this company will change because of people like you. Maria looked at Jason, her eyes full of hope. I think it's time we start a new chapter in life. Not just for me, but for everyone. Jason Matthews could not forget the feeling when he entered the meeting room that morning. His footsteps echoed in the silent conference hall, each step marking a profound change within him. It had been a long time since he had stood before the board of directors with such a mindset. In the past, each meeting had revolved around strategies for growth, optimizing profits, or Matthews Group's continuous development. But today, everything was different. This wasn't just any ordinary meeting. Today, Jason had to face the truth. He took a deep breath and walked in. The executives people he had once trusted were sitting around the table. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The bright light from the ceiling lamps illuminated each face but also reflected the anxiety and hesitation they couldn't hide. This was the first time Jason felt that he wasn't just the CEO of the company, but a leader who needed to do something far greater. He had to confront the truth, the betrayal from one of his most trusted allies and from the very system he had built. Everyone sat silently waiting. Jason walked up to the long table, placed a thick file on it, and began. You all know I've always believed in sustainable development and ethics in business. However, today I'm here to face a truth we can no longer ignore. The executives exchanged glances. A few exchanged subtle looks, clearly sensing that something was wrong. Jason didn't need to prolong it any further. He began flipping through the documents, starting with the evidence he had gathered over the past few days. Brad Miller has been manipulating the human resources system for years. He exploited his position to reduce employees' hours, cut their wages, and even used his personal account to embezzle their wages. Everything was hidden behind the facade of a successful management system. But the truth is far different. I have all the evidence to prove this. Jason lifted the stack of documents in front of the executives. They began flipping through the pages, carefully reading each piece of information. The manipulated work hours, fake payrolls, and the untraceable bank accounts were all presented clearly. The atmosphere in the room became heavier than ever before. No one dared to speak. Brad exploited the workers who should have been protected to make profits for himself. Jason continued, his voice no longer patient, but resolute. This company, all of you, everything we've built has been threatened by manipulation and abuse of power. One of the executives, David, stood up immediately. Jason, I understand what you're saying, but are we rushing into this too quickly? Brad has been a part of this company for many years, and he's helped us achieve great success. We can't just rely on this evidence to destroy everything we've built. Jason could no longer hold back the anger rising within him. David, this company doesn't belong to anyone in particular. It belongs to the workers who have worked tirelessly every day, but were deceived and manipulated. All the success of this company comes from people like Maria, those who can't ask for anything more than a normal, fair life. David tried to explain further, but Jason no longer had the patience. We can't continue to live in the shadow of a system that only appears to be functioning. If you can't see the need for change, then you're only hurting this company. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, and finally another executive, Catherine, spoke up. Jason, I trust your decision. If what you're saying is true, we have to face it. We can't let this continue. This company will only be truly strong when we do the right thing. That was the support Jason needed, a voice from within the system he had built. He knew not everyone was ready to change, but at least now he had a few people on his side. With Catherine's support and a few other executives, Jason continued to expose the secrets Brad had tried to hide. He not only uncovered the manipulations of work hours and wages, but also clarified the dark motives behind them. Jason was prepared to make this information public, not just to protect the employees, but to set an example for other companies, showing that justice could not be bought. It's not just about Brad. We also need to change the entire labor policy in the company, Jason said. We will no longer allow these actions to take place in the shadows. We will make everything transparent, overhaul the human resources system, and create a fair working environment for everyone. After the crucial meeting with the board of directors, Jason decided to meet Maria. He wanted to inform her of the changes that were happening and also thank her for everything she had done. Maria was the one who had helped him realize the truth about what was going on in the company. She was the first to show him that what he thought was a perfect system was actually hiding a terrible injustice. Maria walked into Jason's office with a calm demeanor, but her eyes were filled with expectation. She knew that this was a major turning point in her life, but also a turning point for the company. Jason. I don't know what to say. Maria began, her voice slightly trembling. I never thought this day would come, but I know thanks to you, everything will change. Jason smiled, feeling the strength in Maria's words. Maria, you're the one who helped me realize this company needed change. I won't let you and the others continue to suffer. You won't just be an employee anymore. You'll be part of the leadership team. Maria was surprised, but then her eyes lit up. You really think I can do it? You not only can do it, but you're the one who deserves to lead this change. I'll help you and everyone learn the necessary management skills, but I believe you're the one who can inspire the entire company. From that day on, Maria began preparing for her new leadership position. She was no longer just an employee working late into the night. She was now at the helm of the human resources revolution Jason was starting. Employees began to realize that the change wasn't just about numbers or policies. It was about creating a foundation where everyone felt protected and respected. From then on, Jason and Maria worked together with the human resources team to implement sweeping changes across the company. New labor policies were introduced, working hours were improved, and a fair benefits system was set up to ensure that all employees were properly cared for. All manipulation of work hours and wages was eliminated. The company began holding joint meetings between departments, where every employee had the chance to contribute and be heard. In the end, Jason not only protected the employees who had been deceived, but he also rebuilt his company from the ground up, turning Matthews Group into a model of fairness and transparency in the retail industry. After confronting Brad Miller and exposing the truth before the board of directors, Jason Matthews felt like he had won a major battle. But at that moment, he understood that this victory was just the first step. The journey to reform the company was still long and full of challenges. The next steps would not be easy, and he knew that not everyone in the company was ready to accept the changes he was implementing. After the tense meeting, Jason asked Rebecca and the human resources team to quickly conduct a comprehensive survey of labor policies, working hours, and employee benefits. An investigation would take place not only in the stores, but also in the company's offices and branches. All information regarding wages, insurance, and benefits would be thoroughly reviewed. Jason didn't believe that all the problems could be solved with one swift decision. What Brad had done wasn't small offenses, but a deliberate strategy, a system that had been ingrained in the company's operations for years. Without a comprehensive overhaul, the company wouldn't fully recover. A week after Brad was fired, Jason called a full meeting with the senior executives, including those who had recently joined the leadership team. The air was still heavy with tension. Jason knew that not everyone supported his decision. They might outwardly agree with what had happened, but deep down they feared the changes would disrupt the stability the company once had. We need to start from scratch. Jason began, his voice deep and resolute. No more foolish policies, no more manipulation strategies. We need to rebuild a fair, transparent, and humane working environment. The senior executives looked at each other as if they weren't ready for such a massive change. Hannah, A seasoned executive spoke up, Jason. I understand your goal, but can we maintain stability while changing so many things? What will the employees do if they feel they'll be fired just because of small changes in policy? Jason couldn't help but smile, though his heart was filled with concern. We're not just changing policies, Hannah. We're creating an environment where everyone feels safe and treated fairly. If someone can't accept these changes, that's no longer our problem. Change isn't for the weak, it's for those who are willing to follow the right path. Rebecca, sitting beside him, added, I've worked with Jason for many years. This is the time for us to make a complete change, not just because of Brad, but for the future of Matthew's group. The atmosphere in the room was still heavy, but it seemed like a shift was starting to take place. The executives began nodding, and although they still had concerns, the conviction in Jason's words made them reconsider. Soon after, Jason began implementing the company-wide reform plan. Employee surveys were conducted, and old labor policies began to be reviewed. From reduced working hours to insurance policies, everything needed to be adjusted to ensure fairness. Maria, who had stood by Jason to fight for the employees' rights, was entrusted with an important responsibility. She became the overseer of this process and headed a special team to carry out the human resources reform. Maria was overwhelmed, but felt much more confident with Jason's support and the backing of the leadership team. Jason, I never thought I'd be able to do this. But now I understand this is an opportunity not just for me, but for everyone. Jason smiled, proud of her. Maria, you don't just represent the change of this company. You are the role model for all employees in Matthew's group. They need to see that someone like you, not just an employee anymore, can change the whole company. After a month of changes, Jason began noticing positive signals. Employees started responding better to the new policies. Their working hours became more stable, benefits were improved, and the work environment saw a noticeable shift. Joint meetings between employees and management became more open, and everyone felt the fairness they had never experienced before. However, Jason knew this battle was far from over. Some people in the company still couldn't fully trust the changes he was making. Although employees had begun to feel the change, there were still skeptical eyes at the top. People like David and James were still wary of these decisions, and Jason understood he had to prepare himself to face the challenges ahead. The board continued to meet to evaluate the results after a month of reform, and once again, difficult questions were raised. But this time, Jason no longer felt anxious or uneasy. He knew he was on the right path, and no matter how many challenges lay ahead, he would always stand firm. One afternoon, in an urgent meeting, James finally spoke up, Austin. I can't deny that these changes are starting to make a difference in the company. But can we be sure these changes will be sustainable? Jason looked straight into James's eyes, his gaze resolute. James, we can't just keep doing what's familiar. What I'm doing isn't just for the present, but for the future. And that future will have no room for manipulators, for those who only care about personal gain. Matthew's Group will become a model of fairness and transparency in the retail industry. We will stand firm on that foundation. One late afternoon, when the company had closed and the employees had gone home, Jason sat in his office. He looked out the window, where the last rays of the day still peeked through the trees. He knew that while the company had passed a significant turning point, there were still many challenges ahead. With Maria in her new position, the company began to experience powerful changes. They had not only rebuilt a company, but had built a real community, a place where everyone could reach their potential and contribute to collective success. But Jason also understood that although he had won a major battle, this fight would never end. Every day, every decision, every change he made could create lasting impacts. and the only thing he could do was continue to lead the company in the right direction, never forgetting his original goal, a company for the people. Jason Matthews stood on the balcony of the office building, holding a hot cup of coffee, gazing at the city. The soft light of early morning reflected off the skyscrapers, painting a vibrant picture of a world in constant motion. But in his mind, everything revolved around one big question: how could he create a truly fair work system where everyone has the opportunity to grow and contribute without being exploited? The changes he had begun were just the beginning. It had been over a month since Brad Miller was fired, and the labor system of Matthews Group had started to undergo reforms. But even though the initial results had been positive, it wasn't enough. Jason knew that in a large company like Matthews Group, comprehensive changes would take time, patience, and relentless determination. He took a deep breath, then walked back into his office. Although things were moving in the right direction, Jason couldn't forget his conversations with Maria. Her stories, along with those of other employees, echoed in his mind. They hadn't just lost their rights, they had lost their trust in the company and in those who had once led them. This was something unforgivable, and Jason felt he had to do something greater to restore not only the rights of the employees, but also the trust the company had lost. Jason decided to undertake a comprehensive overhaul of the company's human resources policies, starting with the most fundamental, yet most important factors: working hours, benefits, and employee participation in important company decisions. He called a meeting with Maria and Rebecca, the two people who had been by his side in this transformation journey. "We can't just change policies. We need to change how we think about employees," Jason said, as everyone sat around the meeting table. "None of us can work effectively if we don't feel safe and respected. I want to start by restructuring our work policies, improving benefits, and most importantly, creating a work environment where everyone feels they have the right to be heard." Maria nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I completely agree. I've seen too many workers struggling, not receiving their fair share, and then feeling useless in the company. We need to change how we view the value of people in the company." Rebecca, sitting next to Maria, also seemed very excited. "Exactly. I've worked with many companies, but what Jason just said is really important. We need to focus not only on profits, but also on building an environment where employees feel they can grow and have a future." Jason looked at both of them, feeling more reassured than ever. He had strong allies now. "So where do we begin?" Rebecca opened her laptop and presented a detailed proposal. "First, I think we need to change the way we calculate work hours and distribute tasks. Employees who work shifts should have fixed and fair working hours. Secondly, we need to create a stronger benefits system to protect employees' health and rights, including health insurance, accident insurance, and a leave allowance. Finally, we need to establish a clear feedback mechanism so employees can participate in the decision-making process of the company." Jason listened attentively to every word Rebecca said. Each of her ideas was practical and feasible, but he knew that in order to make these changes, he would have to overcome significant challenges. Human resources reform wasn't just about changing policies, but about changing the way the company had been operating for many years. The next day, Jason officially announced his reform plan to the entire company. A large meeting was held at the headquarters where employees from different branches gathered. Jason stood before the screen, outlining the major changes that would take place in the company. "We are starting a new chapter at Matthews Group," Jason said, his eyes filled with determination. "These changes are not just about policies. They are about how we perceive and treat the people working here. Each of you has value, and you deserve the best." The employees listened attentively, and although they couldn't hide their concerns, there was a glimmer of new hope in their eyes. Some even began to smile, feeling that at last they were being recognized. Maria sat in the front row, feeling the change. She knew she was no longer just an employee, but the one creating this transformation. Jason continued, "We will begin by adjusting working hours. Each employee will have a fixed schedule, and overtime will be paid in full. Additionally, we will improve benefits, including comprehensive health insurance and a subsidy for employees facing difficulties. Most importantly, we will establish a clear feedback mechanism so that you can contribute ideas and participate in decision-making." A wave of applause erupted throughout the room. Employees began to feel that these changes were not just theoretical, but would be brought to life. Jason could feel the power of unity and trust he had built within the team. To implement these reforms, Maria's team immediately began working. Changes to the insurance policies and leave system were quickly rolled out. Each employee was provided with comprehensive health insurance, which covered medical visits, treatments, accident insurance, and a financial allowance when sick or on leave. However, not everything went smoothly right away. The change in benefits encountered some resistance from the finance department. David, the company's CFO, expressed concerns about rising costs. "Jason, I understand your intention, but increasing employee benefits will significantly increase our operating costs. We need to control the budget to avoid running into losses," David said. Jason looked straight into David's eyes, unwavering. "David, I understand your concerns, but protecting employees' health and rights is a long-term investment. A strong company doesn't just rely on numbers. It relies on a healthy, happy, and motivated workforce. We can't just focus on short-term profits and ignore long-term benefits." David was silent for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Jason. I'll follow your lead. But we'll need to closely monitor costs in the coming months." After a few months, the changes within the company began to show clear results. Employees felt proud of their workplace. They began to realize that the company genuinely cared about them, not just financially, but also in terms of their health and personal development. The employee feedback system allowed management to quickly and accurately understand the situation. Maria, who had led the reform efforts, couldn't help but feel proud of what she and Jason had built together. She was given an important project to develop a training program for employees to help them enhance their professional skills and advance within the company. "Maria, I think you've done great things for this company. Now it's time for us to help others develop, just like you," Jason said in a private meeting. Maria looked at Jason with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Jason. Everything I do today is because of your support. But I also know that without the changes in the company, I wouldn't have been able to do anything." Jason smiled, feeling a sense of relief. They hadn't just restored employee rights, but had created a new company culture, a place where every person was respected and had the opportunity to grow. And this was just the beginning. Although the changes in the company were beginning to have a positive impact, Jason Matthews knew his mission was not yet complete. Every day he faced new challenges. While most employees were excited and encouraged by the reforms, some remained skeptical about their sustainability. They worried that this change was just a temporary trend, that one day things would return to the way they were. Jason understood that trust couldn't be built overnight. To truly change the foundation of the company, he had to create a system where employee rights were not just part of the policy, but were at the core of every decision and activity within the company. To achieve sustainability and change, we need to build a new company culture, Jason shared in a meeting with the executives. A culture where every employee feels heard and treated fairly, where they don't just work for a paycheck, but because of the value they bring to the company. The room fell silent. The executives listened, thinking about what Jason had said. Yes, the company had changed policies, but the company culture, the deciding factor for whether those changes would last, still needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. Jason began holding regular meetings with employees to gather their feedback and impressions on the changes. He wanted to create an environment where employees could share their concerns without fear of retaliation. All feedback would be collected openly and transparently, and this helped employees feel that they were truly important in shaping the future of the company. "Thank you for listening to us, Jason," an employee spoke during one of the meetings. "We never had the chance to speak up before. It feels like the company really cares about us now." Jason couldn't help but feel proud. These meetings not only helped him understand the real issues employees were facing, but also created an open space where everyone could share their thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. This, in Jason's eyes, was an essential part of building a sustainable company culture. Alongside this, Jason had begun implementing a comprehensive employee training program aimed at enhancing professional skills, helping employees grow, not only in their careers, but also in life. The program included courses on leadership communication and time management, designed to create a workforce that was not only capable, but also had a positive attitude toward their work. Maria, now a leader in the HR department, played a key role in launching this training program. She wasn't just the person who had helped Jason in the reform process. She was now a role model for other employees, showing them that change wasn't just a theory, it was being implemented right within the company. One morning, as Jason was reviewing the results of the training program, he received unexpected feedback from Maria. "Jason, I just met a new employee from the sales department. She said that after taking the communication skills course, she feels much more confident when interacting with customers. And more importantly, she feels that the company truly cares about her personal development." Jason smiled, realizing that the changes were beginning to yield tangible results. He couldn't help but feel proud of what the company was achieving. Employees were not only working more effectively, but also feeling valued and given the opportunity to grow. Positive feedback came not only from new employees, but also from long-term employees. The veterans who had endured difficult years under Brad Miller's management were now beginning to feel the clear change. They no longer felt abandoned. They felt like an essential part of Matthews Group's development. These changes weren't just limited to training or employee development. Jason also decided to completely overhaul the employee evaluation system, one of the key elements in maintaining fairness. Instead of relying on rigid performance reports that didn't fully reflect employees' real abilities, Jason asked the HR departments to create a 360-degree feedback system where employees could receive feedback from colleagues, superiors, and subordinates. This would not only provide a comprehensive evaluation, but also strengthen communication and understanding between departments. This company will no longer be a place where only one person makes the decisions, Jason declared in an internal meeting. Every employee will have a voice in evaluating their work and contributing to the company's decisions. This is the only way to ensure we truly create a fair working environment. After months of implementing reforms, Jason began to see clear results. Changes in the company started creating a positive ripple effect. Everyone felt valued and had the opportunity to contribute. The company was no longer just a place to work, but had become a community where every employee could grow and find meaning in their work. Still, Jason knew his work was far from over. He understood that change wasn't a result that could be achieved quickly, but was a continuous process. But with persistence and unwavering effort, he believed Matthews Group would become one of the leading companies in both performance and fairness in the retail industry. That day, sitting back in his office, reviewing results and employee feedback, Jason felt a great sense of pride. Although the road ahead still held many challenges, he knew he was on the right path. This is just the beginning, Jason told himself. We will continue to change and grow. The sun began to set behind the towering buildings of the city, the twilight light reflecting off the glass windows of the Matthews Group building. Jason Matthews stood before his office window looking out, reflecting on all the company had been through. After months of fighting to change the way the company operated, he felt proud of what had been accomplished, but deep inside he knew this was only the first step in a long journey. The company needed not only to change policies, but to change the way people viewed work, the value of individuals, and leadership. Jason had been and was still creating a foundation where the company was not just a place to earn a living, but a place where everyone felt valued, supported, and had opportunities to grow. The sound of footsteps approaching Maria knocking on the door to his office pulled him from his thoughts. She had changed so much since becoming the head of human resources, and her steady steps were now a role model for all the other employees in the company. Jason. I've reviewed the reports from the departments. We're on the right track, Maria said. Her eyes filled with confidence and hope. Jason turned to look at her, smiling. So we can say that real change has started, Maria nodded. Yes, employees no longer feel afraid. They're seeing change in every decision, every policy, and that means a lot to them. Jason gave a slight nod, but in his heart he still had concerns. Although things were moving in the right direction, he knew the company still needed to maintain and strengthen this new foundation. Reforms were never easy, and he had to keep fighting to uphold the values he had created. A week later, Jason called a meeting with the directors to assess progress after the months of reform. The departments had started to provide positive feedback about the new policies. However, not everyone had easily accepted this change. Longtime employees, especially those who had worked under Brad Miller's leadership, were still skeptical. Jason. I see we're on the right track, but some departments still haven't fully embraced these changes, David, the CFO, spoke up during the meeting. Employees don't change their work habits overnight. It's going to take a long time for them to truly trust the new system. Jason looked at David, thought for a moment, and then responded. That's true, David. What's important now isn't just change for change's sake, but sustainable change. We have to show the employees that this new system isn't just a theory, it's a reality. Rebecca, the HR director, also spoke up. Yes, Jason. I've met with employees from different departments, and they genuinely feel the change, but they're still doubtful. They want to see concrete actions, not just promises. Jason sighed, then nodded. I understand. Change won't come immediately, and I don't expect it to. But we need to be clearer about how and why these changes are happening. Every employee has the right to know what the company is doing to create a better work environment for them. One of the key policies Jason decided to reform was the employee performance evaluation system. Instead of just focusing on work results, the new system would include factors such as personal development, employee satisfaction, and their participation in decision-making. This not only helped improve communication within the company, but also allowed Jason to grasp the real issues employees were facing. We need to focus on the sustainable development of our employees, Jason said in the meeting. They are not just cogs in a machine, but human beings with emotions, dreams, and aspirations. Our company cannot move forward if we don't prioritize their growth. Maria stood up and continued. I believe this will create a huge shift, not only in how we manage employees, but also in how we view their value. I suggest organizing training sessions on leadership communication and self-development so employees can grow not only in their work, but in their lives. Jason smiled at Maria. Exactly, Maria. This is exactly what we need. A comprehensive training program where each employee not only learns about their job, but also has the opportunity to develop themselves. One of the important elements in Jason's plan was building trust and unity within the company. He decided to establish an employee council, a place where representatives from each department could discuss and offer ideas to improve the company. This would not only help employees feel heard, but also give them the opportunity to participate in the decision-making process. An employee council wasn't a new concept in large companies, but for Jason, it was a vital part of creating a fair and transparent work environment. The council meetings would be held regularly, and all issues from policies and benefits to work challenges would be discussed and addressed. We will create a space where everyone can contribute ideas and solutions, Jason declared. This company cannot grow without the contributions of those who work here. Each person can change everything. While the company was heading in the right direction, there were still many challenges ahead. Maintaining a fair and transparent work culture was no easy task. Jason realized that in every meeting, every decision he made, there were still those who remained skeptical, not fully trusting in the change. David still expressed concerns about the costs the company would face during this transformation. He emphasized that investments in benefits and training programs could affect the company's short-term profits. Jason, I understand what you're doing, but we need to reconsider the costs, David said in a private meeting. These changes will make our budget tight. How can we ensure we'll achieve profit without negatively impacting these expenses? Jason looked straight into David's eyes, unwavering. David, I understand your concerns, but I believe that once we create a better work environment, employees will be more committed, work more effectively, and this will reflect in our financial results. Investing in people is investing in the long-term development of the company. David couldn't deny that Jason's words made sense. Still, he kept some reservations. However, Jason understood that these changes would take time to yield results, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. As the months went by, Matthew's group began to see clear, positive results from the reforms Jason and the leadership team had implemented. Employees felt they were being fairly evaluated, had opportunities to develop, and could truly participate in the decision-making process. The company now had not only a capable team of employees, but also a united one with a strong belief in fairness. When Jason stood on the balcony of his office one afternoon, looking out at the city, he knew the company had begun a new chapter. A chapter full of promise where human values were at the core and change would never stop. This company, after all the trials and challenges, had finally found its path to sustainable success, a company truly for the people.